The key takeaways for Module 4, the economic model, is to help the participants understand the difference between the business model and the economic model and how they work together.
What we want to talk about in this section is to understand the economic model of a business. The economic model of a business talks about what your revenue drivers are. That's a fancy collegiate word of saying, how do you make your money? What your margins are, what your volumes are. We're also going to introduce you to a term called operating leverage that odds are you've never heard about, but has a very significant impact to how you model your business. We're also going to talk about some elements of risk and the implications for risk that some of these decisions we're about to contemplate involve. So with that said, let me introduce you to a couple of concepts.
In the agenda for Module 4, you're going to talk about the economic model and compare it to the business model. So this is an opportunity to have some fun with the Starbucks case and talk about how Starbucks creates value for customers versus how they capture that value for the owners or shareholders. Next, you'll talk about revenue drivers, volumes, and margins. And then you're going to get to operating leverage, which is a tougher concept to teach. So it's usually a good idea to make sure you have a good example in mind of the difference between high and low operating leverage, so you can use that for the class to help them understand it better. The economic model isn't about financials, and that's a big mistake I think a lot of instructors make when they come to this module. The module is meant to help them understand risk and help them use the economic model strategically. It's not about finances, it's about economics of small business. And that's a really important thing to remember and help them understand.
The first is a business model and the second is an economic model. As you can see from the slide, there's a difference between the two, right? The business model is what is between you and your customer. It is the value that you're conveying in exchange for money from them. The economic model is how you capture that value in the form of profit. I said a couple of modules ago that apps are an interesting issue with regard to these two elements. From a business model standpoint, apps deliver great value to those of us using them. But the vast bulk of us use apps that are free. How does that free app help the app creator, originator? It doesn't. They're hoping that we might buy the super deluxe model, or that they might be able to sell advertising to someone who cares about us. But ultimately, they've got a problem in the app world about economic models. My personal prediction is that unless companies can figure out how to monetize app development better than they presently do, that this might become a fad that will tend to burn out over time. I'd be really curious if I was standing in front of you guys 5 years from now, what this story will be here. Because ultimately there's a disconnect between their business model and their economic model. You, however, don't want a disconnect. You want to be sure that there's happiness on both sides of this, and if there is, you guys are going to be rocking and rolling. Let's introduce our friends at Starbucks, and I want to make this point for you in a little greater detail. What is the value? Now we're talking about the left side of the screen, the business model. What is the value delivery that Starbucks delivers?
It's the experience, not necessarily the coffee.
Why do you say that, John?
I read his book a while ago, but it's been a long time.
Howard Schultz?
Yeah, no, I can't. What I remember is it's more about, from the minute you walk in the door till you leave, not just drinking the coffee, but the environment you're in, the attention you give to the baristas. It's overall an experience.
Is it an experience you can get at Dunkin' Donuts?
No.
No? All right. So what's the value between the two? So you're telling me experience. Are there other values that Starbucks delivers? Quality product, coffee.
It's more than just the quality product. Where it's grown, all these environmental issues, making you feel better about what you're buying.
Okay. So you feel good about it, you feel all warm and fuzzy. You like having that cup that has that logo out, and you walk around with the logo out so everybody knows that you have a Starbucks coffee, right? I mean, if it's Dunkin' Donuts, maybe I curl my hand around the logo, right? But from the standpoint of that Starbucks logo, you want everybody to see that Starbucks logo because I just paid $4 for this baby, right? What else are they delivering? Experience. You know what you're going to get each and every time, and they deliver, don't they? Excellent, Betty. What else? Corey.
The atmosphere on the inside when you go in, because the lights always seem to be dim. Got the little chairs where you can sit down. Reminds me of like being one of those reality shows where you see the wives always go to like Starbucks and they gossip. So I feel like I'm on a reality show.
Go ahead, Selena.
Oh no, going off of a little bit of what he said, I noticed not only Starbucks, but they have, I guess, maybe where business people meet. That's what I've been seeing, meeting place where.
Yeah, it's meeting, whether it's business people or housewives or whatever it might be.
I don't see that as necessarily Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's, but
Okay.
Panera, Starbucks.
Is there coffee? Now, I have a confession to make. I don't drink coffee. Okay. I'm just normally this weird. What's that, Brian?
Coffee's made to order. You go in there and you can.
Every cup of coffee is a custom creation.
It is, absolutely.
All right.
So where else are you gonna get that? Dunkin' Donuts is.
Go ahead, John, and then Tarika.
I don't know. I think it used to be like that. Now there was so many Starbucks in the mall that there's no atmosphere and couches and chairs and in the airports and stuff like that. It's more of a you spend $10 for a cup of coffee and you move out.
And that's exactly what I was gonna say. I feel like they walk out from their business model and you can get that cup of coffee anywhere, but it's this status symbol that we're so fixated on.
Is their coffee that much better than anybody else's? No? Some people say they don't care for it, right? It's stronger. It's kind of burnt, sort of strong.
Dunkin' Donuts are the best.
Well, it depends on whether you're getting espresso or you want a cup of coffee. If you got an espresso drink.
Or my chai tea latte.
Can't get an espresso drink at Wawa.
That's true. You can't get it elsewhere. Be curious to see how many people walk in with a Starbucks cup tomorrow morning. All right, so the business model, as it relates between Starbucks and their customers, is all of these values, right? Whether it's the experience, whether it's the image, whether it's the atmosphere, whether it's the customization of each cup, whatever it might be. That's why you go there. That's why people line up to go there, right? Okay. So now let's flip the coin. Let's look at the economic model. What's happening with the cha-ching thing here going on? What's the average cup of coffee cost there? Average. Want to go with 3? Okay. Which is a heck of a lot more than anybody else, right? You think there's profit in there? I mean, you guys are the ones handing over the cash.
Right.
You ever think about what you're handing cash over for? 400%, says Mike in the front. Might even be higher than that. So do they sell a lot in the way of volumes? They're just lined up at the door, right?
Yes.
And they've got high margins. Are there multiple ways that they make money? Or do they only sell coffee? What are the other things that they sell?
Pastries.
Sandwiches, pastries, gift cards? Oh yeah? Okay.
They actually sell breakfast sandwiches now.
Breakfast sandwiches?
25% of the whipped cream on top and 75% coffee.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Can you only buy their product at their store? Oh no? Where else can you buy it? Oh yeah? No kidding. What can you buy at the supermarket?
K-cups.
Oh yeah? What else?
Beans.
Beans, ground beans, right? Okay. So their economic model suggests that they got a lot of different ways to make money, huh? So they have a lot of different products, revenue drivers we call them. Talking about high margins, right? Talking about high volumes. Sound like life's pretty good over at Starbucks. What do you think that their margins are? We said that their average cup of coffee, we're going to go with $3. When you start to figure out what the cup costs, what the coffee costs, what the few moments of barista's time costs, what do you think their total cost is on average for a cup of Joe? 45 cents, $1, what else? Anybody else have opinions? Would you believe 19 cents? How do y'all feel now? All right. So you talk about 19 cents on average, and you just told me you're paying $3 on average. Okay? That's not a bad deal. All right? What's the difference between $3 and 19 cents? Call it 20 cents, round up. You're talking about $2.80. We call that $2.80 the contribution margin, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes, right? So we've now just looked at a company like Starbucks. Now, you already told me they're delivering great value. I mean, you guys are there, and you're in line, and you're paying the freight, and you're happy to do it again tomorrow. And you all knew that they were making money. I mean, before I talked about 19 cents, you knew that you were overpaying, right? And you're going to do it again tomorrow and the next day, and that's just that, all right? And they've got you guys figured out. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. So God bless America. They got a great economic model. Now, let's understand why this stuff is important. I mean, it's kind of fun to bang around and make fun of Starbucks, or actually we're kind of making fun of ourselves, right?
Right.
It matters because it informs management about how to run their business. When Starbucks opens a store, and by the way, they're not franchised, they're company owned. When Starbucks opens a store, they know with great detail how many cups of coffee they need to sell to break even, don't they? So what they really need to do is they're trying to figure out what's the right corner to set my store up on. Where do I want to be? Because I already have the model figured out. I got my economic model. I know how to make a buck. I just need to find out where's the best place to make it. How can I keep the turnstiles rolling to ensure that I have enough people coming through the doors? Where do I need that next store? And if I put it in that next store, is that going to cannibalize my other sales? And do you think Starbucks worries a whole lot about where Dunkin' Donuts or Mickey D's are in the area? Do they consider them to be tough competitors?
No.
Clay says they're a different market. What do you think? You agree with Clay? So they don't really care a whole lot about competition, do they? Because they've built their brand to a point where you know what you're going to get. To Betty's point, it's going to be consistent delivery, and you're able to turn around and know what's going to happen each time I open up a new store, each time I cut a ribbon. Now, Starbucks has a great luxury in that regard. We hope one day for all of us to be there as well. But what this does, when you understand what margin is, when you understand what volumes are, when you understand what revenue drivers are, you can now start to talk the talk and be conversational with a financier or anyone else about how your business runs. From this, you're able to make decisions about how to build your economic model and how to build your company. For example, our friends at Southwest Airlines, they're kind of the maverick in the airline industry. If we go back a slide and we put Southwest Airlines logo in there, how would we answer these questions? What's their value proposition? What's their customer value?
Free baggage.
Free baggage.
Inexpensive tickets.
No frills. Inexpensive tickets. You have an assigned seat? How do you, what's that?
The C group kind of does. It's like first two groups go in, then C just whatever's left.
Okay. I haven't flown them in a while. I didn't even know about C Group. In terms of their model, all right, you're talking about no assigned seats. You're talking about figuring out how to get it inexpensively, free baggage. How do they sell their tickets? Do you get their tickets on Expedia or anywhere else? Yeah, only direct, right? Okay. So their experience is, with their customers, is wherever they go into a market, they want to be the low price leader. They want to be the market driver. They want to be the biggest deal in their given market, which is why they're not everywhere. All right, and they're in second-tier cities a lot of times. What's their economic model look like? What about, go ahead, Clay.
They use the same product. They're all 7.3s. So all your pilots have the same training. Your mechanics, your parts, your equipment, everything is based on that one aircraft.
Pretty ingenious, isn't it? I mean, when you get down to all of the costs to keep a fleet of airlines going, when you have the same plane for all of your aircraft, that's a great advantage. What else do they have going on? Let's think about what we talked about, drivers. They don't have as many ways that they make money as the other guys because they're not hitting you up on the baggage, right? But are they charging you for anything else that the other airlines would normally just give you? It's not a loaded question, I'm just curious. Do they charge you for peanuts or anything like that?
No.
Okay. So what about margins? Their margins aren't as good as other airlines because they're a lower price performer, right? They're not charging as much. My point here is that even though they don't have all the great answers the way our friends at Starbucks had, they're, by anybody's standards, a pretty successful outfit. And interestingly, it's no great secret what Starbucks does. I mean, we could dissect them in 15, 20 minutes. We could have their entire business and economic model figured out. So you know that their friends at American and United and Delta all know it too, and they know it better than we do. Yet they haven't decided to replicate that model because it doesn't work for them. And that they have their model and Southwest has their model, and I'm going to have my model and you're going to have your model for your given business. And how this plays out with regard to the economic model and why it's important is you need to understand your company and where it fits together. You need to be able to understand how you've built your enterprise and how it differs from those that you're competing against, because it will change the way you run your business. Let's talk about the economic model of the business. These are the 4 elements that I want you to commit to memory. Revenue drivers, fancy term for how do I make money. Even fancier term for saying how do I separate my customers from theirs, okay? So how do I make money is revenue drivers. Volumes, am I selling high volumes, low volumes, medium volumes? Margins, same question. And then operating leverage, which we're about to educate you guys on. But before we go to operating leverage, let me ask you guys, while we're in the aircraft business here, we're talking airlines and stuff, let's think about our friends at Boeing. Let's look at the 3 drivers, the 3 issues unrelated to operating leverage. Let's talk about margins. Boeing aircraft. Do they have a high margin per aircraft built? You better believe it, okay? They make a lot of profit per unit sold. Because, do they sell a lot of volume?
Compared to coffee cups.
Not compared to cups of coffee, that's right. So I don't know what the answer is, but I'm sure that they sell no more than a few hundred aircraft in a given year. So to keep an outfit like Boeing going, you better believe that there's a lot of margin per unit. So when you build your business, if you don't have high volumes, you better have high margins. How many different ways does Boeing make money? How many revenue drivers do they have? They really only got a couple that I'm aware of. One is selling new planes and the other is selling parts. That's about it. So from an operating leverage standpoint, that's an issue, which we're about to, again, I don't want to jump ahead. I don't want to get you too far down the road into operating leverage. But from an economic model standpoint, Boeing's economic model is different than Southwest, which is different from United, which is different from American and Delta and all the rest. So you see where I'm going. You want to understand how you have built your business, and you don't want that to just be random. You want to think about how you're building your business. What are the decisions you're making along that ride? So let's think about revenue drivers. Let's play a little game here. We're all familiar enough. We all either own automobiles or have rented them or whatever the case may be. Let's think about a car dealership. How many different ways does a car dealership make money? Service? Parts?
New car sales.
New car sales? Used car sales? What else? Finance? What was another one? Rentals?
Insurance, warranties.
Insurance, warranty work? Or warranty upgrades, right? Okay. So I'm up to 8 fingers. Interestingly, when you talk about margins for a car dealership, what's their lowest margin
Selling cars.
unit? Selling which kind of cars? New cars. They all advertise the heck out of new cars, but margins-wise, it's not much there. They make all their margin in all those other things that I counted my fingers on. Yet, which do they advertise about? New car sales. Why do they do that? If they sell you a new car, what's in it for them?
That's repeat business.
Repeat business. You're gonna stay in their orbit, aren't you? You're gonna come back to them for warranty service and parts, they hope, and all the rest. So they want you to be part of their community thereafter. So their economic model is highlight the lowest margin product as a kind of an ability to bring in customers that can live in our community, in our world, so that we can cross-sell all of these other higher margin items. And if we can bring you in by selling you a used car, which happens to be one of their highest margin items, so much the better. okay? So if a car dealership had to live and die exclusively on the issue of new car sales, they wouldn't last too long. They would not make it. There's not enough margin in new car sales, nor enough of them to cover their ends. They have a different economic model, certainly, than our friends at Starbucks. So it's about being smart about how you build your company. So the car dealers long ago got smart about increasing the number of revenue drivers they have, all the different ways that they make money. And they've gotten sophisticated about how they bring you in to be part of their community. When you buy a new car, for those of you that bought a new car, you find out you have a great new friend who 3 weeks later, and every 3 weeks until you die, sends you something, okay? Whether it's an email, whether it's a mailer, whether it's whatever, your oil change is ready to go, we know your car is up to 15,000 miles, come on in for a check, we want to charge you $500 for the visit, whatever it might be, all right? But you've got a new best friend in life, and that's how they've built their economic model. Margins are something I want to start to build the depth of your understanding now. Margins we talk about, and think of this as profits. In our example with Starbucks, we talked about the difference between their cost and their price. And I used a term for you guys, you might want to write this down, called contribution margin. And contribution margin is the difference between the price you charge and your, here's a new term, variable costs. Because when we figured out what the cost of that cup of coffee was, what did we consider in those costs? The cup, the coffee, the barista's time. Did I leave out any other costs that a Starbucks incurs?
Yeah.
What did I leave out? Overhead, rent, insurance, utilities, marketing, right? We call those fixed costs. But you better believe they're part of the party, okay? So contribution margin, which is, I said before, the difference between your sales price and your variable cost. In our example, if the variable cost is 20 cents a cup and we're selling it for $3 a cup, our contribution margin is the difference, which is $2.80. That contribution margin now is used to pay all those other expenses so that we can break even and hopefully do a whole lot better and break even. But those other expenses, which we just reiterated, those we call fixed costs. A simple way to remember this is that variable costs are those costs that vary in relation to sales. Everything else we call fixed cost. We're going to dig into that in a little bit.
So in your example, you gave the $3 minus the 20 cents, you had $2.80. So that's your contribution margin.
Right. Each sale is contributing that margin to your coffers.
So you still have, it's not necessarily.
That's not your net income.
Right, okay, because you still have the fixed costs.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm trying desperately to not take you down the rabbit hole of accounting, all right? Which I don't want to do for the purposes of this seminar. But what we're really talking about, we're just scratching the surface of what could be a whole semester's worth of accounting course.
So is that what they're talking about on Shark Tank without saying the contribution margin?
Yes, a lot of times when they're saying, what's your sales margin? Well, our sales margin is 80%. What they're really talking about is contribution margin, to be precise, all right? Volume, of course, the more the merrier, right? You know it. So volume is all about, that's the third of the 4 legs of the economic model. So ideally, if we're like Starbucks, we have high volumes, high margins, high revenue drivers, life is pure gravy. We get into other businesses and we don't have the arrows always pointing in the right direction. That's okay. Our charge here, our goal is not to be able to build a business that has arrows in every single one of those fashions. We understand that it's going to be high or low. Perfect example was Boeing. They don't have high volumes. They're a very successful business. They've figured out a way to accommodate that. Each of you have different circumstances as well. I'm looking back at Corey. Corey's going to sell his motorcycle parts. Was it motorcycle parts? You might not be able to sell at a high volume. You might need to increase your margin. Yet earlier you were saying to me, I want to be the low price provider. We might have a conflict here that we need to think through, okay? Because I counseled you, be careful about being the low price leader. You might not have the luxury of being both low volume and low margin, all right? So you want to think through the logic of what we're talking about. We call this internal consistency. We want to be sure that there's an internal consistency to what we do. So you see here 2 examples. 2 companies, both in the auto industry. On the left, you see an $80,000 Porsche. Anybody recognize what's on the right?
Fusion?
Not a Fusion. It's a Yugo, which some of you guys don't even know about, okay? Because you're too young. But a Yugo was a $3,000 bucket of bolts back in the day. And they lasted for probably 3 or 4 months, and then they were in the shop. But they only cost $3,000, and they were kind of disposable cars, really. You ran them for a year, they break down, you throw it away, you get another one. They don't exist any longer, in part due to the war in Yugoslavia a generation ago. But bottom line was we all kind of snickered at the car. But there was money being made. Each of these two companies made money. The company on the left, Porsche, let's compare their margins and their volumes. You think they have a high margin sale price?
No. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Each unit they're making a pretty big buck. How many units they sell comparatively? Fewer, right? Our friends at Yugo, how much could they possibly be making at $3,000 a piece? They're low volume, or low margin, high volume, selling lots of them. They were all over the place. I don't know that I've seen one on the road since because they don't last that long. But again, it's informing. Now, these two companies are in the same industry, yet it's informing us how we run our particular business. So now it's time to talk about that magic word I've been holding off on, which is operating leverage. I want you guys to write down another formula. I'm actually going to pull out the board over here. Sorry, Mr. Cameraman. Operating leverage equals fixed costs over total costs. So just write that down for me real quick. OL equals FC over TC. And when you've done that, I want to now explain its impact. Remember we talked a few minutes ago about the difference between variable costs and fixed, right? And fixed was all that overhead and all the stuff that doesn't go into the delivery of a given product. It's all the rent, the utilities, the marketing, the staff, the overhead stuff. Fixed cost, as a relation of total cost, will give us a sense of our operating leverage. The fraction I just gave you is not a hard number to calculate. It's not a numerical answer, but rather a relational answer. If you have higher fixed costs as a percentage of your total costs, you're said to have higher operating leverage. If you have lower fixed costs as a percentage of your total costs, you are said to have lower operating leverage. Essentially, we're comparing fixed and variable costs within your enterprise, within your business. Now remember what we said about how they operate. They are two different kinds of costs, and what we need to do, trust me because you're going to see in a few slides why this is important, we need to try and figure out which are in which bucket, which are fixed and which are variable, and then we're going to try and find out what the impact is of how they shake out. How many fixed do we have versus how many variable? And this measurement, this relationship between the two is we refer to as the operating leverage of a business. Operating leverage, as you're going to see in a few minutes, has a dramatic impact on risk and profitability. What you're about to learn is unknown to 95% of the entrepreneurs I've met over the years, and this puts you way ahead of the game in about 15 minutes. First, we talk about variable costs. I want to redefine these two categories for you. Variable costs are those costs that vary in relation to sales. That's the cup of coffee, it's the cup, the coffee, the barista's few minutes of time. That's your variable cost. Your fixed costs are everything else. It's real simple to remember. Let me test your understanding here for a quick moment. If fixed costs are everything else, then we also need to realize that they probably remain the same for a period of time. By definition, they're fixed, okay? So if there's no difference in overhead, whether we sell 1 cup or 1,000 cups of coffee that day, the fixed costs stay the same. Variable costs vary dramatically, but we still had to open this door, we still had to have the lights on, we still had to pay utility bill, we still had the staff, we still had the overhead, we still had the marketing, you get the idea. So fixed costs remain fixed, as the name implies. They remain stable. Variable go up and down. Now here's a brain twister for you guys. You ready? Okay. Which is more important to cover first? Your fixed cost or your variable costs? Which are more important to cover first? Fixed cost people, you are wrong.
Oh, it's the same.
All right? Here's why. All right? The 2.5 smartest people in the room are right here. John was almost there, but he backed out. All right? Here's the logic, and Clay said it well. All right? If you can't cover your variable expenses, stop. If you can't cover the 19 cents that it costs to fill that cup of coffee because you can't charge more than 19 cents, what are you doing? Stop right there. Right? You need to be able to cover those variable costs, otherwise you don't have a product to sell, you don't have a company, there's no contribution margin, and that contribution margin is what's going to pay all the other fixed costs. So if you can't sell your product at a contribution margin profit, game over. Don't go a minute further because you're not going to make it up with volume. Right? If you're losing money on each unit you sell, the more you sell, the bigger, the deeper the hole. All right? Perfect example, real world. We're not talking about theoretics here. About 5 years ago, when the last cost of energy spike occurred and diesel fuel doubled in cost from $2 a gallon to $4 a gallon in 30 days, truckers got crushed. Truckers, they work on a tight margin, right? And do truckers, what is their highest variable cost? Fuel. Is fuel a large piece of their total cost? Look back at your operating leverage question now, your formula. Fuel is a large portion. Variable cost is a large portion of their total cost. Fixed costs are lower. Okay? Now, if I'm a trucking company and all of a sudden my margin's vaporized and I'm going to lose money with each mile I drive, what do? Park the truck, tell everybody they're laid off, we're going to wait this thing out. And that's what they did. A large number of them did that. They couldn't raise their prices fast enough to offset the incremental cost of the rising fuel. So there's a real world example of what I'm talking about for my little brain tease. Variable costs, if you can't cover variable costs, stop right there, game over. All right? You can always drag your payment on the fixed cost. You can always sell more variable, or you can always sell more product to get contribution margin to cover your fixed cost. But if you can't cover your variable, you can't sell your goods at a profit over variable, nothing to talk about, game's over. Make sense now? I told you before the formula for operating leverage is OL equals FC over TC, which is to say the higher your fixed costs are as a proportion of your total cost, the higher your operating leverage. Let's talk about some examples. You think an airline is high fixed cost? I do. Okay? You think about the aircraft, think about the ticket sales, the overhead, the ground staff, the repair people, the spare parts inventory, blah, 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 blah. You're talking about a high fixed cost operation. In fact, the only variable cost I can think of is fuel, and fuel doesn't vary a whole lot whether they've got 50 people in a plane or 250. Okay, so they really are a high fixed cost operation. That's their economic model. So if that means that their break even to cover those fixed costs is 150 fannies in a plane, in a 200-seat plane, that's a pretty big challenge, right? Because their high fixed load, they have a higher risk of failure. They have a higher break even point because they've got to put at least 150 fannies in that plane to cover all those fixed costs that they have. Only after they get to 151 fannies in that plane do they start to make a profit. So the higher your fixed cost, the higher your operating leverage, the higher your operating risk. All right? You can fail more readily, and you have a higher break-even point with a high operating leverage business. Stop me if you're not getting it. I can redo it. Okay? There's a flip side to all of this, however. As you see here, it takes more units of service each month to break even. But once you break even, you make more money. Stick with me with the airline example. We've just put 150 fannies in that plane. That 151st person has a $500 ticket. How much of that $500 is going to our bottom line? About all of it. Okay? Because What's the incremental cost? What's our variable cost to fly that 151st person? A couple of peanuts and probably a quart of fuel, right? And the 152nd person, et cetera, et cetera. So from 150 to 200, when we fill that plane, all of that's gravy. That's all profit for us. So what I'm about to explain to you guys, the issue of operating leverage, whether it be high or low, is not a question of good or bad. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's a question of what are you? There are plenty of very successful high operating leverage businesses out there. There are plenty of successful low operating businesses out there. The key point is to know what you are to be able to build your model accordingly. I'm not here to say to you, oh, high operating leverage, that's bad. Because while you do have to take on more risk, while you do have a higher break even with a high operating leverage, high fixed cost company, your benefits are higher on the other end. If you have high operating leverage, you should have either or high margins and or high volumes. These are the implication issues that I'm talking about. And remember that the more you customize, the higher your variable costs. That barista who has to make that, well, I don't even know the names of some of these drinks, but it takes her an extra 5 or 10 minutes to make it at Starbucks. That barista is driving up the variable cost accordingly. So understand that customization will impact your variable costs. It'll also impact your margins. Now that we understand operating leverage as it relates to risk, and I need you guys to bear with me here because I told you this is the language of business. We need to be able to be conversational in this stuff. When you think about your given business, if I ask you, are you high or low operating leverage, I hope you'll have an answer now, right? You'll have thought about your business. What are my fixed costs? What are my variable costs? In proportion, do I have more fixed or more variable? That's going to tell me, do I have a high or low operating leverage? That's going to tell me in turn, do I have a higher break even? Do I have a higher risk? Whatever it might be, these are the implications of knowing that stuff. But now we also, armed with this information, can also figure out the break even in our business. You see, if I asked you guys, how do you figure out the break even for a Starbucks store? You need to know some data, right? Believe it or not, you don't need to know a whole lot of data. If I give you their average sale price for a cup of coffee, their variable cost for that cup of coffee, and their fixed costs, I can within a few pennies figure out what their break even is. That's all you need. Here's how it works. You take your fixed cost, let's say that it's $1 million a year in fixed costs to run that Starbucks store. And we know that our margin, our contribution margin is $2.80 a cup, right? Simple math. Take $1 million, divide by $2.80 of contribution margin, and now that we can know exactly how many cups to sell. Anybody with their phone on? Take $1 million divided by 2.8. 357,000 cups of coffee. That's what the break even for that store with that economic model works out to be. So Bob, don't lose that number. We've just figured out how many cups of coffee we need to sell with just 3 items of information. What the sale price is, what the variable costs are, and what the fixed costs are. Bam, bam, bam. We now know we have to sell 357,000 cups of coffee in order to break even this year. Can we figure out what our sales need to be? Yep. Because when it's going to take 357,000 times $3, Bob, and that's going to tell us what our sales will need to be. $1,070,000. So that's what our sales need to be for the year in order to break even. That's how many cups we need to sell that year to break even. If we have multiple products, I mean, I gave you guys a simplistic example with just 1 cup of coffee. Life's not that simple, I understand. If we have multiple products, we do the same thing on a multiple basis to figure out what our average margin will be, our average contribution margin, and then we just plug that in, okay? If with the multiple products, our average margin is going to be $2.42, well, that's what our gross margin is going to be here when we do this math. So the key to all this is that when I ask you, as your financier, Clay, what do you think the break even is for your business? What have you calculated it to be? Unless you do this, you can't answer that question. And 95 out of 100 people that I asked that question to couldn't answer it. Can you imagine running a business and not knowing what your break even ought to be? That's stunning. Yet it's done all the time. And those people are just too lazy to figure it out. All I've done now is I've shown you guys how to calculate that. Why it's important is that you're going to build your model. This is all your economic model. And if you can't talk this language, if you don't understand the implications of this, we've got a problem. Well, no, I was about to get into another one. Go ahead.
So when you're at the point of taking this to a finance, I'm guessing all of this is almost just a guesstimate, approximate.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely you're forecasting. These are projections. Okay. Let me also twist your brain here a little bit. Again, this isn't a trick question. This isn't a fun question like we just tried to do before with the fixed cost and variable cost. You are, by your estimation, in the model that you've built, you've just figured out that I'm a high operating leverage business. I have a high percentage of fixed cost to variable cost. And I don't want to be, because I heard Ken say that a high operating leverage company is a higher risky. There's a higher break even. I want to lower my risk. I want to lower my break even. So I have to figure out how to change the dynamics of who I am. First question I want to pose to you is, can you? Can you change? Depends. The answer is yes. You are not born with DNA that cannot be changed in the world of business, right? You can change who you are. What's a traditional, typical, often seen technique to reduce your operating leverage, to reduce your fixed costs as a percentage of your total costs? What can you do to reduce that? What's that?
In my business, you said?
Yeah, in just any general business, Selena.
How about outsourcing?
First time I've ever heard somebody get it right on the first try. Say it louder.
Outsourcing.
Outsourcing, okay? Let me draw a distinction. When I say outsourcing, I'm not talking about send all your jobs to China, okay? That's called offshoring, right? Outsourcing is send a part of your production process, a part of what you do, to someone else. I don't care if they're across town, across the street, or wherever they are. When you push that out, you have reduced your fixed costs and turned it into a variable cost, right? Because let's say I'm making widgets. I don't have to build a factory to make widgets. That would be very expensive and have a lot of fixed costs to run that factory. Instead, I'm going to outsource the production of widgets and only order them as I need them. I've just turned what was previously a fixed cost to build that factory into a variable cost to get them in as I need them. I've just reduced my fixed costs down. I've just reduced my break even. I've just reduced my risk. Now the flip side is I've probably left a little profit on the table, haven't I? Because I now have a variable cost that's going to kind of reduce my overall profitability. But that's a decision that I've made because of my management of risk early on. Now, just as I lowered my operating leverage through outsourcing, can I ever increase it in the future if I want? Sure is right. So if 5 years down the road, my business is stable, I'm doing fine, I'm no longer at risk of covering the nut, and now I want to juice up profits, I can insource. I can bring back what I previously had outsourced and make it in-house. I can build that factory, I can do what I want, because even though I'm increasing my fixed costs, I'm confident I can cover that with my break even, and now I make better profit, just like that airline selling seat number 151. Yes. Temporary staffing is a perfect example of outsourcing a previously fixed cost. Now instead of, think of the benefits. John, I'm helping to sell your product here. All right, you ready to roll? Let's first ask John, what are the benefits of outsourcing staffing to John's temporary staffing business, his recruiting business? One of the big reasons is that if I'm done with John's people, I say, John, I'm done, don't send them in tomorrow. We're done. I don't have to worry about separation agreements. I don't have to worry about COBRA insurance. I don't have to worry about labor claims. I don't have to worry about somebody saying I fired them because they're too old and it was age discrimination. I mean, you name it, all right? I'm out of the hassle business of employment. I simply have turned what was previously a fixed cost of overhead into a variable cost for when I need it. Now, will I pay a little bit more to John than if I were to have them as my own employees? Yeah. You know, if I were to hire somebody for a year from John versus have them on staff for a year, I'm going to pay more to John. But it's worth it to me to have the flexibility to have them come and go as I please. If I don't like their eye color, they're out. Right? I don't have to explain it to anybody. John, take them back. So that's the value that John brings. And Tarika, going back to your point, by using somebody like John, I'm lowering my operating leverage. I'm taking what was previously a fixed cost and turning it into a variable one. So getting back to the issue of break even. I've just shown you how with just 3 variables we can figure out what the break even is of our business, both in terms of units as well as sales. And thank you, Bob, for helping us out with that math. We also maybe want to figure out when we're going to break even. Remember, we had to sell 357,000 cups of coffee at Starbucks. And it's going to be important for us to figure out at what point in time we break even, right? So at that point in time, we have the happiest day in the history of our life. It's the day we no longer are pulling money out of our own pocket to keep the business going. This is the day that the business lives on its own and hopefully continues to do better and better over time. It's the happiest day in an entrepreneur's life. When you cross that threshold and you stop losing money, start making money. Based on our projections, based on the research that you guys did in last module, based on how many people are out there to buy your cups of coffee, you will be able to figure out with some clarity when I'm going to sell that 357,000th cup of coffee that year. And from that point on, I'm in clover. I'm making money thereafter. Got it? So you can figure out point of time rather simply that way. From a graph standpoint, some people are visual learners. We've so far been doing a lot of audio. I apologize for that. But you see in the blue line is our sales going up versus our total expenses. At some point, in this example in mid-June or July, we're going to cross that threshold. We're going to sell that 357,000th cup of coffee. Now we're going to have some fun with numbers. Trust me, this is not real painful. Okay? But I want to have you guys, between this screen and what's in front of you, follow me with a very simplistic income statement. Now, first off, I need to explain to you guys that accountants are extremely dangerous when it comes to multiple terms for the same thing. What you see behind me, some accountants will call an income statement. Others will call a statement of operations. Still others will call a profit and loss. Still others will call a P&L. All those terms mean the same thing, all right, in the world of accounting. We're going to call it a simplified P&L, which stands for profit and loss for this company. And you see at the top line, you see the sales for this company each successive month of a given year. And then beneath that, you see variable expense. So in January, when we had 0 sales, we had 0 variable expense because, remember, variable expense is a function of what you sell. If you didn't sell anything, you have no variable expense. Yet if you stay in January, we still had overhead that month. We were just getting started. We spent $6,000 in overhead that month. So we lost, for the month of January, $6,000. In the month of February, we had sales. Hey, great, cut the ribbon. You had $1,000 worth of sales. And we have a variable expense percentage of 20%. So for this hypothetical company, variable expenses are 20% of sales. So that's the $200 you see behind me. That leaves a margin, a contribution margin of $800. That $800 is what's left over to pay everything else. But like I said before, fixed costs are fixed, right? So we had another $6,000 that month of overhead. So we lost another $5,200 overall. We're making progress, but not a whole lot. The next month, you see sales go up a little more at 20%, the variable expense. You see the margin, and we continue to make progress. But at the same time, we're still losing money until the end of the month of June, where we have that fabulously happy day when we pass the Rubicon and we no longer are losing money. We made $400 that month. Okay? Now, at the end of the year, you see that overall, when we add up all of our monthly results, overall we lost $2,400. So let me ask you guys a question. We've lost money for the year. We had sales of $87,000 in total for the year. but we lost 2,400. How much money should we have started this enterprise out so that we would survive? Should we have had 2,400 bucks in order for us to, at the beginning to be able to survive?
At the very least. 6 times 7? 6 times 6.
How about this, guys? $2,400 is not the answer. $2,400 is the net of what you lost for the year. But let me take Kimberly, for example. And Kimberly, if I had $2,400 to start here, how long would I have lasted? About 2 weeks? I wouldn't have made it to here with -6. So I need a whole lot more than 2,400 to survive the full year, don't I? I need 6, 52, 48, 44, 36, 2,000. In order to survive to this point, I need at least that much in my pocket, right? So it's pretty important that we understand this is the language of business, guys. This is why we project financial results. This is why we consider the economic model, why we consider margins, why we consider revenue drivers, why we consider volumes, why we consider operating leverage, how we can modify our operating leverage up or down based on decisions like outsourcing or insourcing or outsourcing staffing. We build this model up, which we're going to talk more about tomorrow, based on what we believe reality to be. And then we project our financials. And once we project our financials, then we get a sense of how much money we need in our pocket to get started. I've talked to many an entrepreneur. Very few can answer the question, how much money do you need to get started? Oh, $1 million will do. Yeah, I would imagine it would, all right? But let's think about something a little more modest. Precisely how much money do you need to break even? I don't know is their answer. Very few of these decisions are throw the dart against the wall and find out. Most all the questions you just posed can be answered in your research phase that we talked about last module, okay? You're going to find out what the norm is in your business, what the average cost of coffee is, what the average variable cost of the cup of coffee is, what the average wages are. So you're going to, with some level of specificity, be able to figure out what are my fixed costs, what are my variable costs. I'm going to do my research to find out what cup of coffee goes for in our community. So I know I'm going to be able to sell it at $3 a piece. So until you do that research, you really can't answer this. There's a reason this module follows the last one. These guys were building on stuff, each module, guys. So when I say to you that 95% of the entrepreneurs out there are winging it, I mean sincerely, they are making it up as they go along. Because I've met them and I've financed them, okay? You're talking about needing to do the research we talked about last hour, and then using that research to inform you about the model that you're now building and its implications. We've been talking about fixed costs and variable costs. What you just described is called opportunity cost, right? There's a cost to not going into business. You might miss the boat. The train might leave the station without you. So there's a cost regardless of the decision you make. And we're not done with the numbers, but we're done with the hard part of the numbers, okay? If you guys can grasp this stuff, the rest of it is easy sledding going down. Let's go to the next phase. Remember I told you that operating leverage has a large impact with regard to your profit, your operating model. Remember our formula for operating leverage, fixed cost over total cost. How much of my total costs are fixed? I also told you that a high operating leverage company, once it breaks even, makes more profit than a low operating leverage company. I'm now going to show you mathematically what I'm talking about, but I also want to point out a couple other things, because I did also tell you that high operating leverage is riskier. High operating leverage not only is riskier because it increases your break-even point, but it also has a lot of bearing on your ability to project, your ability to predict results. And here's what I'm going to talk about. So let's first talk about a high fixed cost firm that is at break-even. Break-even we define, of course, as zero profits. They have $100,000 in sales. They have $20,000 in variable costs, that's 20%. So their fixed costs are 80% or $80,000. We would all agree that a company that looks like this is indeed a high fixed cost company, a high operating leverage company. Now let's compare it against a variable cost firm that's also high. Now, I apologize for the nomenclature. This gets kind of screwy. High variable cost means low operating leverage. All right? Follow me on that. Low operating leverage is what this is. So I'm sorry if you've gotten confused with the logic. I wish they'd use a slightly different term. But in any case, this too is a break-even company. And we're flip-flopping the components. Variable costs are 80%, and fixed costs are only 20%. Both of these companies at $100,000 in revenues, both break even. They do it in different ways. So we're now comparing a high operating leverage and a low operating leverage company. Now watch what happens when revenues go up by 10%. The high fixed cost company's sales go from 100 to 110. Their fixed costs, remember over here at 80%, $80,000, they're fixed, they stay the same. Variable costs go up 10% from $20,000 to $22,000. So of that $10,000 increase, $8,000 of it fell to the bottom line. That's what we're talking about how a bulk of profit for incremental sales falls to the bottom line. By comparison, if we're talking about the low operating leverage company, the company with the high variable cost, they too at $110,000 jump. Their operating leverage went from 80, or their variable cost went from 80 to 88, that's 10%. And fixed costs are fixed, so they stay at 20. Only $2,000 fell to their bottom line. Right? This is what I've been saying before. Now you're seeing it mathematically. We're going a step further now. What happens if revenues go down by 10%? Instead of going up by 10, what goes down? What's our prediction here, guys? Who's going to get hurt worse? The high operating leverage company is going to get hurt. Watch what happens. So we have a 10% decrease in sales. Gone down to 90,000 from 100, from 100 to 90. Fixed or fixed. This goes from 20 to 18. They lost $8,000. So just as it benefits them when sales are going good, it hurts them just as much when sales aren't. Variable cost company only loses $2,000. You need to predict, you need to choose first, and then you need to predict the impact. You need to choose, do I want to be a high or low operating leverage company? I can be either one based on structural decisions I choose to make in my business. And what's that going to mean here? Overall, most entrepreneurs will choose to have a low operating leverage company initially. They don't want the high overhead, the high fixed cost, the high burden, the high barrier to get over initially. I built my business as a low operating leverage business. I was okay with the fact that I was giving up potentially better profits in the long term so that I had less risk up front. That doesn't mean you have to. As I said earlier, there's no value judgment here. I've seen successful businesses in either way. You just need to know what you are and know how to change whether you want to be high or low. So let's be honest. The more revenue drivers, the better. That's always the case. The higher the margins, the better. The higher the volumes, the better. Operating leverage, that's a flip of the coin depending on where your head is at and which one matters to you more. Ideally, all the arrows are pointing in the right direction for you, just like in Starbucks. However, be prepared for them not to. The reality is very few companies have the Starbucks kind of economic model where everything's, lollipops and sunshine. We all have to kind of make comparisons. We all have to kind of deal with conflicts and make sacrifices to change this or that to find the right model for ourselves.
At the end of the day, by the end of Module 4, you should have them complete up through Section 4 in the feasibility analysis tool. So they've got the knowledge they need to apply to their own unique concept. So you'll get them to go through their motivations for starting a new business. They'll talk about all the conflicts they have and how to resolve them. They'll get into the opportunity and their value hypothesis, and then they'll finish with their economic model. So if they can go home after day 1, having completed Sections 1 through 4 in the feasibility tool, that will give them enough to apply, to sleep on it, and come back with some good questions the next day. The Boots to Business Intro to Entrepreneurship 2-day course opens the door to all era veterans, military spouses, National Guard, Reserve, and transitioning service members who are interested in pursuing business ownership. Interested eligible individuals can customize their small business journey using a variety of resources throughout the U.S., including nearly 70 SBA district offices and a variety of SBA resource partners, including veteran business outreach centers, women's business centers, small business development centers, and Senior Corps of Retired Executives, also known as SCORE. Free learning can also continue beyond the initial 2-day Boots to Business course if graduates choose to enroll in an instructor-led 8-week online course offered by Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families. This 8-week online course is designed to provide participants with the tools and knowledge to identify a business opportunity, draft a business plan, and launch an enterprise.